Hello and welcome to the second video in Osborne Clarke's Building Safety video series, in which experts from across the firm unpack some of the key aspects of the Building Safety Bill, which is currently going through Parliament. My name is Rebecca Francis and I'm in the Real Estate Disputes and Risks team, and I'm joined by Matthew Kyle, who's in our Regulatory Disputes team.
Hello.
Today I'm going to be asking Matt about the new roles of duty holders under the bill. So Matt, the Building Safety Bill creates a series of new roles for duty holders. What exactly does this mean?
Well, it means that under the legislation there will be those with defined roles that have statutory duties, so obligations that they must discharge, and a failure to comply with those obligations for each of those duty holders will result in criminal sanctions. This is a piece of legislation with some criminal teeth, so it's quite onerous in terms of thinking about those duty holders and what they've got to do to comply with the law.
So who are the duty holders under the bill then?
Well, it builds on the construction design management regulations duty holders and also creates some new ones. So in relation to the sort of existing duty holders who may be familiar with under CDM, client, principal contractor, principal designer, they form part of this bill as well, but with enhanced requirements. And then the new roles are the accountable person, who comes in at the point of occupation of those buildings in scope. And if due to the building ownership there could be more than one accountable person, then you will have the role of principal accountable person. And then sitting below those and appointed by the accountable person will be the role of building safety manager. So those are the statutory roles, say some building on what's there already and then some completely new ones as well.
So in terms of the existing roles under CDM regulations, are you able to give a bit more information about those?
Yeah, I mean, in very simple terms, they're enhanced in the sense that the client, who can be an individual organisation, it's the entity with the benefit, or feels the benefit of the work involved. There'll be their usual obligations, which is to appoint competent designers, contractors. But the important part is they'll also be sort of coordinating or responsible for ultimately developing and maintaining the information. This is the golden thread that you've heard about. That's been much sort of trumpeted in respect of this bill. And that's really about all of the information that demonstrates the safety of a building, fire safety, structural safety, access, that sort of thing. And the client will have much more responsibility for that, and also for developing a reporting process back to the building safety regulator who enforces all this. I think, although again details to be worked out, I suspect it's not going to be as arm's length as perhaps in practice it has been with CDM. Similarly, it's not going to be the case that where those clients are familiar with health and safety files, operation and maintenance files that come with a development and a construction. Here that's going to be much more detailed, obviously with a focus on fire safety, structural safety, but as I say, I think there's a bit of a step change in terms of the information that they're providing. And in terms of the principal designer, it's going to necessitate, I think, a much more involved role for them, and in particular a more involved role across the development piece, so right through to practical completion, partly because they've got to feed into this information that goes to the building safety regulator to get through the various gateways, and also they're responsible with the principal contractor for signing off a declaration to say that it's been constructed in compliance with building regulations. So I think your designer again becomes perhaps more closely engaged than they might otherwise have been, and allied to that, because of the fire safety element, there's going to have to be constant input, I think, from fire safety expertise, particularly if buildings change as they get constructed, perhaps from original designs. And then the principal contractor will have to also significantly contribute to the golden thread and the information that the accountable person, that's the role in occupation, will then be responsible for providing the safety case and getting through that. So the principal contractor is going to have to say, be very careful about, frankly, how they document the way in which it has been built, particularly thinking about things like fire stopping, which are hidden, the materials used, and to evidence that it's been built to design. So all in all, it's going to involve a much closer interaction, as I say, allied with a significant fire expertise input into that.
And what about the new duty holder roles that are being created?
Well, every occupied building in scope that will have to have an accountable person or principal accountable person, as I said, if the ownership dictates that there would be more than one. And the accountable person is a significant role. They'll be responsible for conducting a risk assessment of the building safety risks, and taking proportionate steps and managing that side of it, and collating the information into the golden thread, and also establishing a residents' engagement strategy and complaints procedure, because a big part of this is about transparency for those who are actually using and affected by the building. So there's the safety case and there's the ongoing management part of it as well. And I think, interestingly, between the drafts of the Building Safety Bill, one of the changes was in relation to what would be determined the management of risk, and it went from the accountable person being responsible for taking steps to prevent a major incident occurring to just reasonable steps to prevent building safety risk, which obviously could be really quite broad. And I think it's just another example of saying, well, actually, this is the way it's going. It's much more scrutiny, and as I say, quite a low bar really to say, well, yeah, you've got responsible for anything that's material to the building safety, so any material risk to building safety. So I think that change is quite interesting. And the accountable person also has to appoint a building safety manager. It is possible that the accountable person could also be the building safety manager. These can be organisations, and I'll come on to that a little bit later. But in most cases, we suspect that there'll be a separate entity that's the building safety manager, and they've got the responsibility for the day-to-day building safety management. So really looking at whether the various measures are being implemented and adhered to, and whether there's any new things that are coming up, and also really to be the link between the accountable person who's got sort of the overarching view and the residents themselves. So they'll have quite a role in communicating with residents, the building safety manager.
So just following on from that then, on the ground, who is going to be expected to perform these new roles?
Well, an accountable person could be an individual, such as a building owner, but I think it's probably more likely that they'd be a corporate entity, such as a management company or managing agent, who perhaps takes the role across a portfolio of properties. However, it does require a high degree of understanding of fire and building safety measures, as well as the particular detail in respect of that building for which they are responsible. So it's a role that really requires quite a varied skill set, I think, because they'll need to be responsive to changes in the building, such as changes to services such as gas, electricity risers, or installations, telecom masts, because they could impact on your overall strategy for the building safety. So that they'll be responsible for really thinking about, whether that's created a new fire risk, whether something has changed, whether they have to change both the information, but both perhaps the interface with whatever's coming into the building. And then building safety manager, as I said, will be key in communicating through to the residents, as well as ensuring the day-to-day things. Again, could be an individual or a team, perhaps facilities, with a facilities health and safety type background. But I think with that added part of being able to identify risk and control them, and in doing so being able to alleviate the residents' concerns probably before they escalate. Again, you've got to think quite carefully about your building safety manager, because I think they're going to be a really important position, so that you can understand what's happening with the building and manage that risk, and as I say, hopefully prevent any escalation. It is possible for one entity actually to perform both roles for the purposes of notification to the building safety regulator. A corporate accountable person can nominate itself, but then within that organisation, as long as it's got somebody suitably qualified and competent, could have the building safety manager within that as well. So there's a bit of flexibility with this. So I think there's an opportunity for corporate entities to save some costs and administration in terms of wrapping that together. But they will need to, as I say, make sure that as well as a competency, they're really fulfilling that resident side as well. I think that's where some of the problems might well mount, and they'll have that interaction with the building safety regulator. So mixture of individuals and corporates, but a corporate could perform both roles. But I suspect the market will start to try and fill that void with some expertise, but it will need some upskilling. It's not just a property management job anymore.
How do you envisage the accountable person role will interact with the responsible person under the fire safety legislation? Do you see scope for overlap there?
I think there is considerable overlap, and those that are familiar with working within the regulatory reform and fire safety order and the role of the responsible person there will be thinking, well, actually, where does the accountable person fit in? We're already doing some of those things and expected to be managing the fire safety risk in common parts of buildings. There has been a recent consultation on the fire safety order, so I can expect some things to change, particularly guidance around responsible person there, and I suspect that part of it will be how it interacts with the accountable person. That said, I think safety management can often fail because people or organisations are unclear about their particular role. And if you like, sometimes it falls between them where responsibilities haven't been made clear. The government's approach is to say, well, of course they'll work together and it will be very consultative. They've got their own duties, but it will be a holistic approach to providing a very safe building. That may be the case, but I think actually it's going to be one where we need to really watch for changes, perhaps both to the fire safety order and more detail in terms of the guidance that comes with this, because at the moment it's really quite unclear quite how to work together, particularly as we know in some buildings there's quite a complex structure. So you may have more than one responsible person for different parts of a building. So it's slightly one to watch, but undoubtedly they're going to have to be quite close in terms of how they consult and work on things, because it's all really part of the same strategy, because fire is such a large element of it.
I guess finally, what do you see as being the biggest challenges?
Unfortunately, cost.
Yeah.
I think with these new duty holder roles, how will these costs be passed on? Who's going to fund those? The roles themselves, particularly the new ones, are quite onerous. As I said, they're backed by criminal sanctions. So who is going to sort of step up and fill these? Is going to be a bit of a skills gap. How's insurance cover going to work, potentially for them as well? And also, as I said before, I think it's quite a challenge to appoint building safety manager that has that sort of dual edge of the safety knowledge, but also being able to be a point of contact with local residents. I think probably property agents will sort of scale up to fill this void across a portfolio. But ultimately, even if some of these roles and responsibilities are delegated, ultimately those in control of the building and responsible for the building overall are still going to be the ones that have to ensure that they've got people competent to do it, and also that they've provided them with enough information and resource to actually discharge their obligations, because any errors made by those duty holders are going to flow back up the chain. So yeah, it's really slightly waiting to see, but I think you can already prepare and say, well, we think perhaps we may fit in here, or we're going to need some more resource or experience to come in at this point.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay.
Please join us for our next video, where Matt will be looking at the requirements of the golden thread. Thanks very much.
Thank you.